Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be going over what happened in the June Joust Tournament this past weekend. Of course, there were 4 teams left fighting for the June Joust title. The NYXL, Atlanta Reign, Dallas Fuel, and the Shanghai Dragons. And so let's jump in and let's talk about what happened this past weekend and see where things ended up. Let's pull up the actual bracket that we saw. As you can see here, NYXL losing to Atlanta Reign in the first round, Shanghai Dragons losing to Dallas Fuel in the first round, Fuel beating the Reign in the second round, advancing to the grand finals, Shanghai Dragons beating both the NYXL and the Atlanta Reign to set up a rematch with Dallas Fuel in the finals, and in a 4-3 7-map thriller, the Shanghai Dragons came out on top of the June Joust Tournament. Really great tournament. It was a really entertaining grand finals match. The rest of the tournament was pretty one-sided. As you can see, the only other match where there were any maps won by the losing team was the Dallas Fuel versus the Atlanta Reign. Everything else was a very one-sided affair, so not that surprising, but a little unfortunate. Definitely want to see some better matches in all of the tournaments going forward. Because if that final match had gone the way it seemed like it was going to go for the first 3 maps, it would not have been a very fun series. Real quick, let's throw up my bracket that I made, which was all around pretty good up until the grand finals, where I predicted the Dallas Fuel to win, and ultimately the Shanghai Dragons were victorious. But every other game I thought was pretty easy to predict. That was pretty obvious that was the way it was going to go. So, yeah, all in all, pretty good, all things considered. So let's talk about the tournament. I'm going to talk about this in a team-by-team basis. I'm going to start from the bottom with the team that finished in last place, the NYXL. Now, they, of course, faced off against the Atlanta Reign in round 1. Very dominant win for the Atlanta Reign. Was not particularly close. The Reign looked a lot better than the NYXL. We all expected this. I had some person on one of my videos comment, I guess it was my picks video, that I was an NYXL doubter, to which I will happily say, yes, I was an NYXL doubter, because they didn't look very good. And guess what? I was right. They weren't very good. They were not ready for this tournament. They have some talent. They have certain compositions they looked pretty good on. I don't understand what they were doing for a lot of this series, both against the Atlanta Reign and against Shanghai Dragons. They just looked outclassed, right? The NYXL are a talented roster, and we know they're a talented roster. We've seen how good some of their players are. Flores looked really good on the McCree throughout this season. Guangboon, whenever he gets the opportunity to play, has looked very good. We know Ivy's good. Feathers looked good on the Echo. Jonak has been having a pretty good season. He's up and down, which is a bit of a concern, but when he's good, this team is very good. But they have very clear issues. This tank line is not really inspiring much confidence in me when I watch this team. They are a very middling team. They are pretty average. They have some strengths and they have some weaknesses, but ultimately the thing that they really just don't have is that star power in that tank line. Yakpung has not looked great. When he looks good, the team looks pretty good, but he's super inconsistent. Most series he plays, he does not look all that great. And a big part of that, I think, is just, the fact that there's not that many great main tanks out there that are easy to find. Main tanks are a very tough thing to come across, just because if you really look closely at kind of what we've seen historically, and you look kind of recently, like there have not been that many main tanks that have really found a lot of success, other than like some from the first season. So it's tough. New York is a team that I think can be proud of the fact that they made it this far, but at the end of the day, it's easier for them to only have to win one game and get this far. They are not a team that's going to win a championship. They're not going to win any tournaments. They're not that good. I love the NYXL. I'm a fan of the NYXL. They beat the Hangzhou Spark in what I would say is a bit of a miraculous win. And For that reason, I think that they had very little chance of winning this tournament, and they didn't even cap a single. They didn't take a single map throughout this whole thing. It was to be expected. Getting this far was a good thing for them, but that was about as much as you would expect from them. The Atlanta Reign, on the other hand, who they lost to in that first game, had a pretty good read on the meta and on the way that this meta was going to be played. I think the Atlanta Reign are such an improved team. I thought they looked incredible going into this tournament, and I thought that they played very well. Yes, they lost to the Dallas Fuel and the Shanghai Dragons in somewhat dominant fashion, but I don't think that necessarily means that the Atlanta Reign aren't that good, or that this is like a team that was also like not deserving of being here. The thing that the Atlanta Reign did this tournament that very much impressed me was they pulled out looks that we haven't really seen the Reign run. We've never thought of the Reign as a team that runs Winston compositions. And granted, they didn't run them a ton, when they found success against New York in their first series, and also when they played, against Boston and San Francisco in the regional knockouts. But we now know that the Atlanta Reign are not going to just kind of roll over and die if they have to play a Winston composition. They can play Winston compositions, and they can beat teams like the Shock running it. They can find some success against the Dallas Fuel running it, because the map that they beat the Dallas Fuel on was Control, where the Reign were running these Winston compositions. So, for me, I'm incredibly impressed by what the Atlanta Reign were able to do. Yes, they fell short. Yes, they only finished in third. But they get that extra point in their overall standings, which is really, really good for them. That's something that you can benefit from immensely if you don't have to do that. It helps you break ties, right? This actually bumps them up in the standings ahead of the Florida Mayhem. And that's a really good thing for the Reign. They are actually going to be able to keep moving their way up in the standings, right? Teams like the Justice are still ahead of them, and the Gladiators are still ahead of them, but those two teams don't have any additional points. So if the Reign kind of keep this momentum going and keep looking like an improving team, they can most definitely find some success going forward and be a really good team. I really do have a lot of faith in this team. I think what they've done is really impressive, and I think that there is a lot of things to take away from the Reign. They are a very, 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 very much improved team that has shown that they have what it takes to step up in big moments and to beat some good teams in big tournament style, elimination style games that really mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. And that to me is why I think this Atlanta Reign team, you have to give them a ton of credit, and you have to call them one of the biggest winners from this June Joust tournament. They may not have won the tournament itself, right? And they may not have been able to find the same level of success that Dallas and Shanghai were in this tournament. But they had to beat some good teams to get as far as they did. And the fact that they were able to do that is incredibly impressive, and I think that they have shown that they have developed a lot as a team. My biggest criticism of this team going into the season was Gator and Hawk. I think that was a lot of people's biggest criticisms. We knew the DPS line would be really good. I was pretty confident in the support line, more so Iris than I was Masa, though I figured Masa would be just fine. I don't think Masa's ever been really a bad main support. It really came down to how well these tanks were able to play. And the improvement we've seen from them this season is incredible. I don't know exactly who the credit for that falls to. Obviously, the players themselves have improved a lot, which is important, and that is on the players. But I also think the addition of Unter as a coach is a huge addition, and I think he is a big part of why this team has looked so much better this year than they did last year. So, huge credit to the Atlanta Reign. I think they have been one of my favorite teams to watch this season, as they have started to improve and get a lot better. I think they are a team that I'm really interested in seeing what they are able to do going forward and whether or not they keep this momentum going. We're going to get back into the Reinhardt compositions potentially going into the Summer Showdown. We know that they are comfortable running those rush compositions. There's an argument to be made that they are actually the best at double shield, so what they actually do going forward, who knows, but they're going to get back into being able to run more comfort compositions. It's going to be more open for them. They'll have more options, and I think that this is a team that should only get better from here on out. I think they're a really scary team. for any team like the Mayhem, the Justice, the Gladiators, the Outlaws, right? The Shock, who have shown to be slipping a bit, to have kind of struggled a bit against some of these other teams that are really good. The Reign are in the conversation with that caliber of teams in the NA region, and I think that is a huge, huge reason why I feel very confident in the talent and the performances that these Reign boys have shown us so far. So let's talk about the Dallas Fuel. They get second in the tournament. They beat the Shanghai Dragons on the first day of the tournament, beat the Atlanta Reign on the second day, and then lose in a 7-map classic to the Shanghai Dragons. And I think ultimately what you can kind of boil the Dallas Fuel down to is that they have one problem that we kind of knew would be a problem, right? Well, I guess there's really kind of two things that people were concerned about at the beginning of the season, and I would argue even potentially three things. One was the support line. There were a lot of questions whether or not the support line would actually be very, very good. So far, I think the support line has been outstanding. Fielder especially has been the top flex support in the league, arguably. And I think Jexa has had a very, very, very good season as well. I think he's having a super underrated season. In the IBM power rankings, he's listed as like the weakest member of this team, but that just feels super disrespectful to what he's actually been able to do for this team. Like, obviously, there has to be a quote-unquote weak link on the team, but that doesn't mean Jexa is actually like a weak link. He's really, really talented. And I think that this whole team has looked really, really good, and that support line especially. One of the other concerns for this team was, will they have someone that can play Tracer? Because we haven't seen them have a ton of success on Tracer in previous years. Obviously, now we know that Sparkle's Tracer is actually very good, and that if push comes to shove and they need a Tracer, Sparkle can run it. The third and final concern was, we know how good Fearless is, especially on Winston, but how well will this team be able to perform if Fearless can't play the Winston? And that was a big kind of narrative that drove this finals. The Dallas Fuel are much like the Shock in the Summer Showdown of last year, right? The Shock didn't feel comfortable playing Genji in that tournament. And so they just ran the Striker Tracer because they knew that Striker's Tracer was really, really good and could beat anybody else. And the reality is, yeah, they can beat pretty much anybody because they're a really talented team. But the second you get a team that is as talented, or maybe like ever so slightly less talented than you, but they can run a composition that is better than what you can run in Winston, the Dallas Fuel just cannot hit that same level as they can when Fearless is on Winston. And it's difficult to find main tanks that are that dominant on every hero. You may never find players in the league that have that kind of caliber where they can play every main tank hero on a super high level. I think with Fearless, the gap between his best, which is Winston, and kind of the rest is bigger than most other heroes. Though I will say I think his Reinhardt is also very good. So, it's not as much of an issue. But like his Orisa and his Wrecking Ball don't look all that great. He played some Roadhog in this series. And so when they got forced off of the thing that made them comfortable, the thing that they found success running, they kind of got found out in a pretty noticeable way. And so I think going forward, the Dallas Fuel are going to have to, of course, hope that Winston is a very solid pick for the rest of the season, right? Obviously, in the Summer Showdown, there are no hero pools, so they can play whatever they want. But there's a possibility that Winston will be banned in the Countdown Cup, right? Could be a Diva, could be a Wrecking Ball somehow, or a Sigma or a Zarya, depending on what compositions people like to run. Rush, you use a lot of Zarya. Double Bubble, you have Zarya, so could be one of those heroes instead. But in a hypothetical future, which obviously, if you base your entire analysis of a team on hypotheticals, you're not doing very well. But in the event that Winston, gets banned in the Countdown Cup, or in the event that Winston, by the end of the season, just gets completely countered by a bunch of the meta compositions, maybe there's a balance patch that comes up where Winston just gets completely nuked. Or I was going to say nerfed and nuked combined. But maybe they nuke Winston, right? They nerf him really heavily. Maybe it's an indirect nerf because they buff somebody else, like a Torbjorn or a Reaper or somebody, make them stronger to the point where Winston can't really do anything. I have a ton of concerns about how well this Fuel team will play if they can't play Winston. But the Fuel are so good at what they play, and they know what works for them, and they are so confident running whatever they want to run, that as it was said, I think by Rush or Aid, one of the coaches for the Dallas Fuel, they said that the meta is what we want to run because they're so good and so explosive and so talented, right? The only team that we've seen, beat them in these really big moments is now the Shanghai Dragons. And it was a close series. It wasn't like Dallas got rolled. No, it took the Dragons a long time to catch up. It was Dallas won the first 2 maps of that finals in dominant fashion. Shanghai didn't capture a single point until map 3. They had 0 points on the board until map 3, which the Shanghai Dragons were able to win. And it was a pretty close map. And that was kind of when you felt like the Dragons were starting to look alive, starting to look like they were really starting to figure everything out. But it was a hard-fought series. And so the Dallas Fuel still look great, right? They've played the Dragons now 4 times this season. And the Dragons managed to win 1 game in a very, very close fashion. I still feel pretty good about the Dallas Fuel. I don't feel bad about them at all. They should be a team that finds success going forward. I don't think that they are going to be a team that we ever really look at and say they're not good. Are they the best team in the league right now? Maybe not, because the Shanghai Dragons beat them, but maybe they still are, because they also were still able to beat the Shanghai Dragons the first time they played them. It really is an interesting team to look at, because when you boil them down, it really just feels like a team that you just say, they run Winston, they win. If they don't run Winston, they probably don't win, but they just run Winston whenever they can. And that's the recipe for success for them. It feels too simple at times, but it's what's worked for them, and that's what they've been able to do, and that's what I think has been the biggest sign for them going forward. If they can run Winston, they can win. End of discussion. Final team is, of course, the Shanghai Dragons team that won the June Joust, and I want to give a major shout-out to the coaching staff of this team and to Fate, because those 2 groups are pretty much directly responsible for this win. The Shanghai Dragons were running basically the mirror matchup with what what the Dallas Fuel were running, right? Dallas Fuel running the Winston Diva with Echo Reaper and Lucio Moira. And that was what the Dragons went into this weekend running. It's what they ran against the Fuel when they played the first day. And it didn't work for the Dragons because they didn't really look as strong on the Winston. We know Fate's a really good player, but his Winston isn't really what he's known for. He's known more for his Reinhardt and his Orisa. He has a good Winston, don't get me wrong. And against, 18 other starting main tanks in the league, you might even say Fate would have the edge on Winston. But against Fearless, he doesn't, and there's nothing wrong with that. Fearless is arguably the best Winston in the world. And so, as the weekend progressed, we saw the Shanghai Dragons start using this Wrecking Ball-based composition, which did a lot of the same things that the Winston-based composition did, but it allowed for more power out of Fate. It allowed Fate to do more to disrupt the Fuel, to get them out of position, and that was the key. They knew that this was their win condition, and even though they struggled for the first 2 maps of the finals, they kept using it. And eventually, it started to work. Eventually, they forced the Fuel off of the Winston. We saw Fearless switching to the Roadhog on Eichenwald. We saw for the last map or 2, on Junkertown, at least, we saw Fearless was mirroring on the Wrecking Ball. And when Fearless is on the Wrecking Ball, he didn't look as good. I mean, that is a very, very, very known thing with Fearless, right? Fearless is good on, or I should say, he is absolutely incredible on Winston. Outside of that, he's a pretty good main tank on a lot of these other heroes, and some are better than others. And his Wrecking Ball is not one of those ones that I think Fearless is particularly well known for. And so Shanghai adapted, and they changed what they were doing. They adapted their strategy to specifically counter what the Dallas Fuel were running, and it worked. And by the end of this series, you felt like the Shanghai Dragons had shown you why people look at them as one of the top teams in the league. The Dallas Fuel are not going to be able to just run over everybody running, Winston and just kind of forcing everything. No. The Dallas Fuel have figured out certain things that work, right? Obviously, the Lucio Moira was really, really strong, and the Reaper Echo was really strong. And the Shanghai Dragons agreed with that. But maybe it wasn't the best composition. There's a possibility it wasn't the best composition. But in that moment, running the mirror composition, but with Wrecking Ball instead of Winston, was the best composition because you knew it was what Dallas was going to run. And so you could just say, we know we have a really good team. We know our roster is really strong, and we can figure this out. And Fate played his role perfectly. He did exactly what he needed to do. He found a ton of success. A lot of people were talking about, this is finally Fate getting that win that he's never had before. Obviously, he's a World Cup champion from 2018, and he won Stage 4 in 2018. It's not a grand finals, but that I would say that the 2018 grand final or 2018 Stage 4 finals is more impressive than this, arguably, because you had to have a bit more sustained success to get into that top 4. But you could argue otherwise. There's definitely arguments to be made otherwise. But this is a really good performance by Shanghai Dragons. They solidified themselves certainly as a top 2 team. I'm not even going to lie to you. After Friday, when they lost 3-0 to the Dallas Fuel, I was about ready to drop the Shanghai Dragons potentially out of the top 5 of my power rankings. I was going to drop them probably number 5. I was like, look, they clearly NA is dominant. Clearly NA is better than the APAC region, right? The Gladiators pushed the Fuel. The Reign looked really good. The Reign beat the Shock, and I think the Shock are looking like, they beat the Fuel, so they're looking a lot better. They look like they know this meta better. The Justice looked really good recently. They might even be better than the Dragons. And then the Dragons said, no. Hold the brakes there for a second. We're still very good. We had a bad game, but we are still an elite team, and we should still be considered one of the best teams in the Overwatch League. It was a fantastic series, a fantastic finals, and I am incredibly happy that we saw a bit of a change in the series. We didn't just see the Dallas Fuel repeat. We saw a repeat of the finals, but what we're getting now is very reminiscent of that 2019 Vancouver Titans and and San Francisco Shock rivalry. I'm curious to see where it goes from here, but what a great finals we had. Really salvaged what otherwise would have been a pretty lackluster tournament. And I'm very much ready for the Summer Showdown and see if some of these teams can bounce back, if we see new blood coming up to potentially try to take that spot away from the Shanghai Dragons and the Dallas Fuel of those 2 best teams in the league. Incredibly excited to see where we go from here, and I cannot wait for some more Overwatch League action. So that is it for me for today. I'll have more videos, of course, this week on my power rankings. I'm going to do Wednesday and Friday, so if you're excited for those, stay tuned because they're coming out this week. But I'm going to get out of here. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on what happened during this tournament. But that's all from me. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.